Greibh Mahagad, Greibh Corda, August Herlock Michael, Celine, Interim CEO, and board members, panellists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, former Minister Richard Bruton, and Adini Usla Ella. Great to be here with you this afternoon. Delighted to be able to join you. I listened to your chair's reflection on computer science and a little bit maybe slightly before my time, but I remember those little cards that we used to insert. I've read about them in the history books anyway, but I do remember having once to take on a project where in my early graduate career where we had to program an all VAX and VMS machine, which was the old mainframes. And I remember actually we layered XML onto it using an Oracle application, and we used some open source software to build a configuration engine from scratch, customized, which would not only update the Oracle and Java and all the newfangled components, but also would reprogram using, I'm trying to remember the language, the VAX machines, and had their own operating manual. And I suppose it was interesting, a very interesting project, and dare I say, a little bit quite innovative. But we also then applied to the new R&D tax credit, because we said the company I was working for said this is actually a new innovative idea, using a new way of doing something, which layered legacy technology with the latest and greatest technology, including open source. So there was that little vignette maybe as a snapshot of what's great about research and innovation and taking traditional established ideas and systems and layering on a new vision for them or a new skin on top of them, and then indeed the support of the state coming in with the enterprise credit. So just as a little trip down memory lane, you took that to mind, Chair, and thank you for doing so. And there's lots and lots and lots of more discoveries and far more profound and far-reaching than that will be made by people in the audience and Research Ireland and the organisation here today, and all that you support and all the good work that you do. So just thank you for it. I think it will be, I'm sure it has been already, a very thought-provoking day. I want to as well really welcome, give a warm welcome to our new incoming CEO, Diarmuid O'Brien. I worked with Diarmuid when he was in Trinity in the past. We encountered each other in different roles, and a really big bullabos and cowardice to Diarmuid coming into the appointment. It is an exciting time, an opportune time for Ireland, for research in Ireland, for everyone who works in the research ecosystem and engages with that research. And as a new minister, working with the new agency, now with the new incoming CEO, and indeed a new and vibrant board, I just wanted to say I'm really looking forward to working together over the next number of years to really step change and advance the research ecosystem in Ireland, working together. Today, I suppose moving into where we are, and it's an excellent gathering and a very worthwhile one. And looking at the date, it was June the 5th is a year and a day since the Research and Innovation Act passed through the Oireachtas and was then signed into law, providing for the establishment in law of Taoiseach Éireann, Research Ireland. And that is, of course, the keystone of Impact 2030, being Ireland's research and innovation strategy. And the agency is central, absolutely central, to realising the ambitions laid out clearly in that strategy. Today is also the anniversary, the birthday of one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, the famous economist John Maynard Keynes, who once famously observed that ideas shape the course of history. And those 6 simpler words, that mantra, can guide us in the course of our work, whether as academics, as enterprise, as public officers, or indeed in any walk of life or at any stage in a career. Ideas shape the course of history, because it is ideas that Research Ireland is tasked with creating and finding and discovering and nurturing. And very often in my job I find, and I've always believed, talent is actually latent, because there is a variety and a multitude of talents amongst our population and the wider world. And it is the job of ministers like me and organisations like you to nurture, support and encourage that talent to come through. And that is actually how we succeed as a nation, as a society, and indeed as an economy. So we must create the environment for those ideas to thrive. And I think in many ways my job is to support you in creating that environment and create it together. And that requires public investment with purpose, being vital to enable the private potential, collective progress, and to drive benefits for the public good. And correctly applied, research and innovation has a significant economic dividend, depending on what report one reads, everything from 3 to 1 to 12 to 1 in terms of return. So research and innovation is a fundamental enabler of the economy, but also that economic success in turn is what drives resources to be reinvested in the public good. So it is circular, and a healthy economy will inevitably lead to a healthy society as well. And I think that circle, a virtuous circle, is at the heart of everything that we look to do together. Research Ireland is, of course, working under the aegis of my department and in close collaboration with the Higher Education Authority, our HEIs, Enterprise Ireland, IDA, and other research and funding agencies, and many more valued stakeholders. So it is an ecosystem, and it is a tapestry, at times complex tapestry, and there are many other, many players on the stage. But I think if we all work together and complement each other, the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. I know that in preparing your corporate plan for the next 5 years, Research Ireland has undertaken an extensive nationwide consultation process since the start of this year with research stakeholders. And this forum today is another important milestone in formulating the agency's future strategic approach. And I look forward to engaging with the agency as it develops that plan. I want to thank all who contributed to it, and the chair again, and interim CEO Celine, and the board and all staff involved. And as I say, as a new minister with the new agency setting out with a new strategy, I'm really enthused by that prospect. I think we'll work really well together. There are many commitments in the programme for government. I could say because I wrote most of them, but I was certainly in the room, and I was key. But I think, to be fair, across government, and from the Taoiseach especially, and across all of my colleagues in the room, there's a commitment which is committed to writing in the programme for government to continue to fund Research Ireland, to continue to fund research at every stage and at every TRL and in every discipline, and to put research central to our educational and economic journeys. And that is part of a broader approach. And the programme for government, I think, is, fair to say, it is a very pro-enterprise programme, a very strong programme, one that envisages globally competing, but also along with regional growth, and fundamentally puts excellence at the top of all that we strive for in terms of excellent research at home and collaborations abroad. So that is a public investment with a purpose, and it's Keynesian in its logic. Keynes, of course, spoke about state investment driving forward ideas and activity, and I think it's in the same vein that I hope to step into as a minister, because there's a key belief that the state has a vital role to stimulate innovation and build capacity in a knowledge-based economy. And I'm mindful as I say that if we analyse our research and development spending as a country, we're probably mid-table in terms of the OECD league tables and so forth. We could be higher, and I want us to get higher, but I'm also mindful that a lot of that is private sector driven, if we're honest as well. A lot of that is coming through from multinationals and so forth, and they're extremely welcome, extremely important part of our ecosystem. But I want the public sector element of that to grow and increase, and that's something I very much will be striving for in the early months, indeed, in this role. So just as Maynard Keynes argued that ideas matter and public spending could be a productive force, so we see research and investment as a multiplier for prosperity, resilience, and indeed well-being. And this is the start of that journey for Research Ireland, and it marks a key moment in shaping a bold and unified vision for the future of research and innovation. It signifies a commitment to building a world-class, inclusive, and multidisciplinary research ecosystem that supports excellence across all fields, from the arts, humanities, social sciences, to science and technology. And as Minister, I've set out 4 clear priorities that I want to adhere to in the course as long as I'm privileged to hold this office, and in collaboration and always welcoming feedback from stakeholders also. But the first one is that we should foster research and innovation as an economic enabler. And I've spoken a few moments ago about what that means in practice, and that absolute leverage that provides everything else in our economy, and how that enables us to differentiate nationally and globally in terms of our economic output and productivity. Secondly, to provide high quality, accessible higher education. That is what it says on the tin, but put simply, that is enabling our people to access the excellence in education in a way that suits them, and in a way that is accessible and not allowing economic disadvantage or any other societal reasons to stymie that, but to support our people in attaining the best of their abilities through excellence in education and through accessibility to that journey. Thirdly, to enhance and expand our skills pathways, to make sure that we have the skills mix for the modern labour force, that we can match our skills needs to our growing economy, and also to our public services, everything from disability to healthcare, right across to more traditional apprenticeships and so on, and making sure that the modern skills needs are being matched, and in a way that is suitable for the learners and those people undertaking in those careers. And the fourth objective that I've set out, I think this one is just as important as the others, although it's less tangible perhaps, is to promote curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge as a public good. Because I think fundamentally the pursuit of knowledge is something worth striving for. And it doesn't always have to have an end game in sight. It doesn't always have to have a metric or a comparator or a particular targeted result. Sometimes, and we know from history, Archimedes, Newton, Newton wasn't searching for a new cider formula when he was in the orchard watching the apples fall. He discovered something far more profound. And that is really the best discoveries. We look at the space race and what fell out of it. We look right across, and there's so many examples in history, that the best discoveries, the most interesting breakthroughs came when they were least expected. So if we fund research and the pursuit of knowledge and curiosity, because I think curiosity is a force for good in any pursuits. So those are the 4 goals I've set out as my ministerial priorities, and there's so much more within that, of course, so many more enablers that come within that, but they are the goals I've set out, all of which are underpinned by strong focus on research innovation, and I look forward to working with all of you to make those a reality. I also look onto the international stage and are very conscious of our place, very proud members of the European Union, and from a timing point of view, we are about to embark upon the presidency of the European Union, and I would chair a research council in Ireland in the second half of 2026. I'm already regularly engaging with colleagues across the European member states, preparing for the presidency, but that is coming at us fairly soon. That will commence in July 2026. It will be a key pivotal moment for the Horizon Europe programme, which is due to conclude in 2027. There are still, I should stress, and I'm sure people are well aware, there are still 2 years to run in that, and I would encourage everybody to fully leverage every opportunity that provides, because while we are focusing on the success programme, let's not miss the opportunity of what we have right now in front of us and draw that down. But we are intensely engaged on looking to guide the shape of the success programme, and it is serendipitous, hopefully, that will be largely decided during our presidency in Ireland next year. We've also seen benefits from the EU Reliance and Recovery Programme, supporting programmes under the National Challenge Fund, such as the ARC Hubs Programme, supported by the European Regional Development Fund, through the regional assemblies. In the wider context, the European Commission is due in the coming months to publish its proposals for the next EU budget and the MFF, which commences in 2028. And as I've said, those negotiations will be at a very sensitive and important stage when we hold the presidency. I welcome the announcement by President van der Leyen of €500 million in funding for the global research talent through the European Research Council. And indeed, I met Professor Lepton, as many of you I think will have as well, on a recent visit to Dublin. And that €500 million funding is a strategic investment in capacity building and competitiveness. It's available to individual researchers of any nationality, and it provides further opportunities for research here in Ireland. And I want to ensure that our research ecosystem can play a full role in the wider European Union programmes, because in today's revolving global landscape, talent is the cornerstone of national resilience, innovation, competitiveness. Our greatest natural resource is our people and is their talent, and we have to nurture that and allow that to flourish. And our future prosperity depends on a highly skilled, diverse and agile workforce, capable of driving discovery, solving complex challenges, and seizing emerging opportunities. And now more than ever is a time with changing global headwinds, and we're all aware of tensions across the Atlantic and across other parts of the world, and the uncertainties, and not least around trade and tariffs, but in many other cultural spheres as well, can no longer be taken for granted, and we are in a changing landscape. So there's all the more reason that we must create an environment domestically where researchers, innovators and creators of all types can not just survive, but thrive. Our national strategy document, Impact 2030, identifies talent as one of 5 key pillars and outlines my own department's strategic approach to continuing to support researchers through their career, including emerging researchers, through students, through early postdoctoral researchers. And as countries around the world intensify investment in research technology and skills, Ireland is acting decisively to attract internationally based researchers, whilst also investing to nurture and retain our top talent at home. It isn't either or, it's both. Last month, I was pleased to secure government approval at Cabinet to establish a global talent initiative to attract global research talent to Ireland. Given the increasingly turbulent and concerning backdrop against which many researchers in the world are operating, we believe Ireland can offer an environment that is secure, collaborative, has shared common values, and that strives for excellence on all fronts. My department will work in partnership with Research Ireland to design this Global Talent Initiative programme call, which will be launched this summer. And I want to thank Research Ireland for your inputs and contributions to shaping that programme to date. I think that's a really exciting opportunity. I am often reminded of Schrödinger, one of our best known researchers of the 20th century, who came to Ireland indeed as a refugee with De Valera opening the door to him and indeed in Dias in the early war years. And those initiatives and these initiatives like the Global Talent Initiative are also Keynesian in outlook in that they recognise uncertain global conditions, call for public-led, forward-thinking actions. Additionally, my department through Research Ireland continues to support a diversity of career opportunities and initiatives for researchers at all career stages. One important step in that journey has been the increase in stipend to PhD students, now set at €25,000 per annum. That is an increase of over 31% from the previous level of €19,000 and achieved in a short space of time. And our immediate horizon also is the completion next month of a comprehensive review of Ireland's National Development Plan. And the review of the NDP covers all public capital investment over the coming years. There are obvious and strong and compelling cases to be made to government to respond across the needs of society, from our huge housing challenge, to education, to healthcare, to transport, to energy, things like grid, things like water, things like power and energy security, things like our infrastructure, our ports, our railways, our airports, our roads, and all of these enabling a wider housing solution are imperative. And I am making the point actively in government that whilst all those things of course are critical, that investment in research and development is actually critical to solving those in itself, because we solve the problems of society by investing in ideas. And actually, again, that is circular, because I don't see this type of investment as siloed. I see it actually something that contributes to the greater good and advances the wider cause. So that is an argument I'm actively involved in making as we speak, and I would make that case in the strongest possible terms, particularly this moment in our life cycle. And the case is being made that I'm making is for research infrastructure, that we don't just fund a project, even though that is worthwhile also, but that we fund an environment where multiple projects can succeed and progress. And we've recognised the need to prioritise this area after a period where it was not possible, and being frank about it, where it was perhaps underfunded in recent years, and perhaps it didn't get the same attention and resources as it may have deserved. And there are various reasons for that, which I won't get into today, but we are in a position now with resources becoming available where I hope to address that and strongly alter that balance and mix and bring forward that significant investment that is so badly needed in the research infrastructure ecosystem. So a lot in the pipeline at home and a lot internationally to focus on over the coming months, and coming off the back of a busy period for everybody since the formation of Research Ireland last year. I mentioned at the start Celine Fitzgerald, your outgoing and interim indeed CEO, and I want to thank Celine for her very valuable contribution in steadying the ship, bringing it through smooth waters into harbour in your short time at the wheel at the bridge, Celine. And it's been a pleasure to work with you in that time. And I want to just acknowledge that contribution that you have made. I want to thank the whole team at Research Ireland that have worked tirelessly over the past year, and your commitment and energy have also hugely enabled the progress that has been made in developing this new agency, bringing a wealth of expertise and talent to the undertaking. I believe that Research Ireland and the broad research and innovation community that it supports have an exciting and productive future ahead. We are all on this journey, and while we have different disciplines and different objectives and different thoughts and ideas perhaps, I think we have a shared outlook, a shared vision, and a shared destination. That is the path of knowledge and ideas. And returning to Keynes, whose birthday we celebrate today, he said the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already, and to do them a little bit better, or perhaps a little bit worse, but to do those things which at present are not being done at all. I think that's a great quote, and we think about that for a moment, and to me it says, not more of the same, but better and different and more new things. I think fundamentally as a minister, if I can do more new things that contribute and add value and support the work of those in the system, that is a fundamentally worthwhile goal to strive for. So I think that's, on those words, I think we sum up, I think the entire, where government can support, not to replace or to substitute for, but to enhance the environment and to intervene in ways that are productive and positive and add value above the already ongoing work and activity that takes place independently. So that is the road that Research Ireland now steps into, backed by the government, in the strong belief that strategic public investment can unlock new ideas and build new futures. And I look forward to putting that together with you. And I want to just thank you for inviting me to be part of the occasion. I'm now about to step into Terry Wogan's lair and have a Q&A, so I look forward to that. I said that trepidatiously, but we'll have certainly an exchange of ideas. But thank you for being here today, and I look forward to working with you into the future.
Thank you, Minister, for those inspiring words. I used to do a Terry Wogan impression. I won't inflict that on you. Minister, as Michael said, I'm based in the UK. I try to keep in touch with the research system in Ireland by following a huge number of research organisations, innovation organisations on social media. Over the last few months, there's been one really striking feature on my feed, which is that Minister Lawless has been turning up absolutely everywhere. Right? I guess you've clearly put a lot of effort since becoming minister into visiting and engaging with the research community, and I've talked to people earlier today that is clearly hugely appreciated. Genuinely curious, I just thought I'd start by asking you what you've learned from your field work, what you found interesting, what's inspired you, what things you've discovered that have shaped your thinking.
So I think that's a really good observation, question, and I suppose I'm glad to see that I'm making that impact already, and just in terms of meeting people and engaging, and that's something I think is fundamental to politics, and that's what I've done in my public career to date, even outside of this particular ministry. There's no substitute for meeting people for real and getting out on the ground and having the conversations. And often the conversations you have at the edge of a lab or the edge of a lecture hall or on the grass before you get into the car to drive away, outside of the public eye, are actually the most valuable, because you have those often unexpected or coincidental conversations that can actually be the acorns that grow into those huge oaks of ideas. So I have tried to do a little bit of a national tour, and I think I've been to all the HGIs now, and I've been to a lot of the research centres and agencies, and if there's anyone left, please tell me afterwards. I'm sure, don't be shy, and I'll try to get to you by the summer break. But I certainly, in my first quarter as a minister, I wanted to get out and meet the field, as you put it, get out in the field. One danger with that is I tend to be entranced by every project I see, and there's so many different projects that I've had the pleasure of visiting, and so many that caught my imagination. And I suppose collectively they say to me the absolute ingenuity and power of ideas that already exists within our system, and the really budding, bright, enthusiastic researchers at every level, at every stage, right from early career, right through to people who are mentoring and are almost beyond career but are almost giving back. And right through across private industry, and some of the really important work that's going on across enterprise at really advanced levels as well. So it's been quite motivating, actually, and quite encouraging to see it. And also renewing acquaintances, because I was spokesperson for this area 5 or 6 years ago when we were in opposition, and many of the same people, many in different roles, but different parts of the ecosystem. And it's been a pleasure renewing all acquaintances as well. But I'm really enthused and excited by the mission ahead. I suppose I have to be careful not to aim too high, because I have to deliver, but it certainly won't be for want of trying, and that's certainly the mission that I've set for myself. And sorry, I suppose just to acknowledge as well, the Taoiseach is entirely supportive and has a personal interest in this area, very much so as well. So it's certainly, as a whole of government, there's very strong investment in the power of ideas, and it's supporting research fundamentally.
So let me ask you then about your vision for Research Ireland in that context. You said it was the 1-year anniversary of the legislation. I think it's the 10-year anniversary of the report that led to the amalgamation of the UK research councils. And that was a really interesting document in that it sort of framed things in terms of things the new agency could do that wouldn't have been possible with the previous amalgamated agency. So new activities, new ambitions, new roles in the ecosystem. So I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on exactly that. What are the new things? You mentioned new ideas. What are the new things that Research Ireland can do that wouldn't have been possible before?
I suppose Research Ireland has a broader spread than either of its child agencies, our predecessors. And I would have been familiar with the old system where we had Irish Research Council, largely arts and humanities, although not exclusively, and SFI doing really strong work in the STEM areas primarily. And I think there's a strength in numbers, and there's a synergy of bringing the agencies together, having one roof, multiple projects. I think it is important that we continue to support across all the disciplines, and also one of the things that I've seen, particularly at the challenge exercise where I saw some of the projects recently, which actually one of the criteria for entering the challenge project was to have a transdisciplinary approach. So researchers from non-obvious intersections actually came together, pooled ideas, and produced some really extraordinary, unexpected results. And one that springs to mind, there was a project I inspected where an architect teamed forces with the computer science team to study what we might call ordnance survey maps, but digital maps of city centres, and using the architectural hat. So the data science people were able to identify maybe derelict buildings or opportunities for new avenues or new points of access or egress to the buildings that were perhaps a little bit dilapidated, behind odd alleyways, etc. And then the architecture hat was able to say, well, the aspect or the approach or the even rights of way are more practical aspects. And then between them, they devised a whole urban renewal project. And at a time when housing need is probably the greatest national priority, that is incredibly useful. Something that was sort of started as a bit of a knocking around ideas over coffee one day suddenly became architecture, computer science, marrying up to, and on a similar mind, another project I visited that day in terms of flood relief and projections. So taking, again, a sort of AI data-driven approach to climate modelling and playing forward the 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10 year flood events, and then seeing, well, what downstream is actually affected by that and what flood defences are appropriate to put in place. And actually, is there, and this can be difficult decisions, is there a point where we say it's actually not worth it, and we need to evacuate, long term from that area? So these are the conversations, but they're just two very real, practical, tangible. Because sometimes the challenge for us as research advocates is to persuade the wider public and indeed, the various ministers for finance that I have to interact on a daily basis to get funding support. Say, well, how does this affect on a day-to-day basis? So of course we have our longer-term plays that can provide amazing results, but it's no harm to have those tangible examples as well. And so I've just been consistently impressed and enthused by the people I've met and the work that they're doing.
Yeah. One of the interesting things coming from abroad and watching innovation ministries in different countries is that they're increasingly having a sort of cross-cutting role in government and by extension their agencies. And as you think about it, it's very hard to think of any policy area that matters, whether it be housing or anything, or the environment, where research and innovation can't make a difference. And so you see agencies, you see it a little bit in UKRI, you see it in Sweden, where the agency is helping through the departments make a difference to other ministries as well. Is that something that's happening here? Is there a role Research Ireland can play to help you and contribute to, as you say, other ministries on things that matter to the nation?
So I think there is. I think I'm going to answer that in two ways. So one of the first things that I set out when I took on the department was that I see this as an economic department, every bit as much as, if not more than, being a service department. So when I say service department, service departments do great work. They supply public services, be that education, be it healthcare, be it housing, but they're, I suppose, it's output driven in a sense of, public goods or public services being supplied as the end game. And I see this somewhat differently, that I see innovation, using that broad term for all that's within a department, as an enabler and a creator of value. So as well as producing objects and services, actually creating the environment to generate the resources through that value add, because by supporting research, development, innovation, we create the economic success and the prosperity, which in turn is good in itself, but also generates the resources for government to do other things. So I think that's a fundamental thing. I think there may be a little bit of a shift in thinking, but every new minister has a new approach, and my approach is this is an economic mission as much as anything else. The second way to answer that question is we have an idea within the department. So Dr. Aoife McLysaght is our government science advisor.
Somewhere.
I think she was addressing the room earlier today. And Aoife and her team, the idea is to look at problems of government challenges across government. So any government department can come to us and say, well, we're trying to figure this one out. And it struck me for centuries, every government that follows the Westminster model, which of course is us included, has an Attorney General and Cabinet. And no serious credible minister would bring a proposal forward without having it legally proved. But there's never been any requirement to have it scientifically proved or engineering proved. So to me, that was a bit of a gap. So Aoife is playing a great role there in terms of leading out that, and that's a new office. And I suppose the system is still coming to terms with it. But to me, it's equally important. Of course, it must be legally sound, but it must be robust intellectually as well in order to succeed.
Maybe just moving on to talent. You highlighted in your speech the Global Talent Initiative, which you've received government approval. Other countries are exploring the same thing. You're moving very fast, which is commendable. I should say I'm aware of at least 2 people watching online who are thinking of maybe coming to Ireland,
Great.
so no pressure.
Very welcome.
So with that in mind, maybe you want to address the camera, I don't know. What do you think Ireland can do and should do to attract and support and retain top talent?
So I think that research and indeed the pursuit of knowledge in general is an area which shouldn't artificially emphasize borders and should be also have the freedom academically and intellectually to pursue interests and see where they lead. And I mentioned that a few moments ago. And unfortunately, we're at a time when that culture is not being valued in the same extent in other jurisdictions. And we're seeing assaults on science, and we're seeing funding withdrawn and challenged. And so there's 2 aspects. There's an academic freedom aspect, but there's also a bread and butter finance and funding code aspect, which is pretty fundamental and very worrying. So in that context, Ireland has the opportunity to be a world leader and say we have the best people here, we have the best ideas here. With my assistance, I really hope we can have the best funding model here and create an environment for the best and brightest ideas and people to come through, be that people already in the system, people coming to the system, people coming from abroad. And I always think there's a kind of fertilization of ideas if you get new people into the system. You know, I mentioned probably the most famous example, Schrodinger, but there's many, many others over decades. And even say in the last cycle of PRTI, there were researchers that located to Ireland because the funding was there for particular vehicles, particular projects. And I was speaking to European colleagues of this because we're not unique in this. There's other countries. France have a program, Choose France. There's many others across Europe in particular that they're having the same kind of thought process. But speaking to some of my European counterparts, other research and innovation ministers in Europe at the last Research Council about 2 weeks ago, I think we have a similar thinking. We're not necessarily in competition with each other. It's Choose Europe largely. But also, there is probably a pattern that will inevitably emerge that people with existing connections. So there's a large Irish diaspora, say, in the States, and indeed for other parts of the world as well. So I was speaking, I think, was my Croatian counterpart who was very envious of our diaspora because I think he said they had 60,000. We have 400 million. So we're winning on that score. But people in reality, we probably won't. And people, by all means, I hope they do have a good look at Ireland and see what we have to offer. But the likelihood that we'll attract people who are already of some link is probably high. And that's, I suppose, so that's in a way it's complementary. So we're not necessarily competing with other member states for the same, because each of us will have a particular pool that might be more aligned already. But having said that, it's a big wide world and all are welcome. And if we can create an environment where people want to come to Ireland and want to be based here because we have best in class research infrastructure, and Research Ireland are playing a huge role in leading that out. I think we'll be doing well.
I see from the clock we have 2 minutes left, so all my carefully prepared questions I can put away. Maybe just finish up by asking, we have a very passionate and very energetic community, a very ambitious community here. So maybe with the couple of minutes that are left, and I'm sure passionate and energetic people online as well, what's the thing you would ask this community to do? Are there things we can do to help you with your ambition and your vision that you've just outlined? Yeah,
so I thought about this a little bit. I think I want to thank the community for the welcome I received as a new minister, both in terms of visits to sites, but just more broadly in terms of the dialogue. I'd say work with me. I think, to be fair, almost all are doing that. To those maybe that aren't, I'd say give me a chance. There's always going to be a bit of naysaying, whatever. I get that, I'm a politician. I've got elected, I think, 4 or 5 times now, so I understand you'll never please all the people all the time. But judge me on my actions, and let's see where we get to together over the next couple of years. But one thing I think that would be helpful to the community is just to, I suppose, join in me with the advocacy for our sector. It is our sector, collectively shared, mine and yours. And that investment in knowledge, in the pursuit of knowledge, in research development, the arguments around that as an economic enabler. Sometimes we find that we're all in violent agreement, but that's because we're of the same mind. So tell others, spread the word more widely, because the more that message is out there in the ether and the public discourse, the I suppose wider support there is for across industry, across enterprise, across government, and that makes the mission succeed in terms of securing resources against other competing priorities. So I think join me in that singing that song, and we'll all be in harmony together, and we'll get others on side as well.
And you perfect, just as it went red, you stopped. That was the precision timing. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. That was very inspiring. Join me in thanking the Minister.
folks. Well, that was really interesting, and lots of takeaways there, I think, from the Minister's address and the really interesting conversation that took place after. I'm struck by, how much the Minister has engaged with researchers all over the system at this relatively early stage in his role, and how much I think he's getting that sense of the contribution that researchers are making in different disciplines and the cutting edge work that they're doing. And that's what this next session is about as well. So it's our second set of research shorts. We heard from 5 really talented researchers before lunch, and now we have a second set of research shorts addressing such areas as space, corruption, consent, and parental involvement in education. So without further ado, I will introduce the researchers, who hopefully again are in the room. Dr. Nina Bresnihan is Assistant Professor and Course Director of Computer Science in the School of Computer Science and Statistics in Trinity College, Dublin. And Nina is going to talk about supporting parental involvement in computing education through family learning. Secondly, Dr. Robert Gillanders, Professor of Economics in the Dublin and DCU Business School and Co-Director of the Anti-Corruption Research Centre. Robert is going to speak about corruption, gender and sustainable development. Next up then we'll have Professor Caitriona Jackman, Senior Professor in the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, who will be talking about the search for habitability in the outer solar system. And then last but not least, we will hear from Professor Pádraig McNeill, Professor of Psychology in the University of Galway, who will be talking to us about active consent, using research and outreach to achieve culture change. So as per earlier, 5 minutes per researcher. Without further ado, I'll ask Nina to come up and start.
So good afternoon, everyone. Another Trinity computer scientist we get about. So I'm here today to talk about our Kids Code project. So first of all, just to say what we do. What we do is we create opportunities for families to learn computing together. And we're doing that through the development and support of family-led coding clubs all over Ireland. So the reason we're doing it is that we want to increase the opportunities for parental involvement in computing education, and very much an interrelated goal to contribute to a greater diversity in the field. So what I'm here today is to talk to you about the research that underpins all of this. So first of all, Mark told us this morning about the importance of addressing the problem. So the problem, we probably all know instinctively how important parental involvement is in education. So it turns out the research backs this up. Parental involvement is complicated, but overall the results and findings from research show that it's a good thing. There's a problem though, because most parents don't have computing experience. So let's say they're perfectly happy helping their kids out with their maths homework or their reading homework. They never had computer science education. In Ireland now, we have computer science, the Leaving Cert since 2018. It's coming into primary schools with the draft STEM curriculum at the moment. And parents need support so that they can support their kids. So a few questions is, what should that support look like? How do we support parents? And more than that, how do we then make sure that they can access this support? And also the parents who don't normally engage in these kinds of things, how do we get them on board? So all of these things are the things that our research looks at. How we do it, don't worry, I'm just dazzling you with the diagram here. I'm not talking through this one. But just to show that we have a definite process of dealing with these problems. And we look at them, we analyse the problems, we develop solutions, and then we bring them out into the communities, and in collaboration with the stakeholders, and across different contexts, we see if they work, and we improve, we refine all the time. So for an example of this, where we started the workshop design, we looked at the problem. So basically the big problem is that parents lack confidence. Experience is important and knowledge is important, but the big one is actually confidence. So what do we do about that? How can we design something that addresses that problem? So we came up with a design for a workshop where families work together. They work alongside other families. They engage in creative computing. And we brought it out. It seemed to work. Confidence increased. They wanted to do more. So we designed a 4-part program. Again, I'm going to skip through this one. Time is short, but you can see from the diagrams there that the results were good. So we now had something we kind of knew worked, but how did we get it out there? Again, what are the problems? Geographical isolation. We wanted to get it out past Dublin into rural Ireland. So we thought about how are we going to solve this? And the Department of Rural and Community Development came on board, particularly with funding, but also access to their broadband connection points all over Ireland. So with them on board, we've managed to establish partnerships with 15 county councils across Ireland. We've reached 5,000 unique participants, but of course we've reached those 5,000 participants multiple times with our 4-part programme. And we've done this delivered over 688 workshops in 111 locations. Now, the thing about that is, even still, they want to do more. So we designed our 4-part programme so that the first part of it, we really hold their hands, but we withdraw as time goes on and we try and encourage them to take over. The idea is that we make something that can be sustained, something that is parent-led and community-led, not led by us in Trinity College. And the nice thing is this seems to be working. So the figures are there. There's 32% of the groups that take part in our 4-part programme meet at least once more. But much more hearteningly, 25% of them continue to meet and have met more than 5 times. We now have clubs that are reaching their 2nd anniversary. We have clubs that have bank accounts. We have clubs that are out there winning prizes, that are taking part in competitions. We have actually a particularly good day as a researcher. One of our clubs had a float in the St. Patrick's Day Parade in Longford, which is pretty good. So this is Columkill in Longford. This is Boher Bites in County Tipperary. So all good. And finally, our plans for the future. So what we want to do now is our next piece of research is trying to reach those families who wouldn't normally get involved. So we're partnering with organisations all across the country. We're working with Clare County Council to bring this to Ukrainian families in County Clare. We've started that. That's a group of our Ukrainian families in the corner. We're working with NASC in Cork to bring it into families in direct provision centres. We're working with the South Dublin County Partnership to bring it to people who are socio-economically disadvantaged communities in West Dublin. We're also working more closely with schools because we want to be able to support the introduction of the STEM curriculum into primary schools, and parents are going to be a huge part in that. And the other thing that we're looking at is a sort of deeper exploration of the gender question. You may be aware that computer science has a bit of a gender problem. Turns out that over half of our participants are female. And that is really without us trying that much, in that because mothers get involved, but also half the kids are also female. And there was a talk earlier of the diversity in research. We need to look at undergraduates. I don't think we need to look at undergraduates. I think we need to look at primary schools. And if we get the girls involved, if we get immigrant communities involved at that stage, then there's some hope of bringing them through. So I'd just like to thank Research Ireland, particularly the Discover team who fund this. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
So, hello everyone, my name's Rob. I must say, after a semester trying to teach undergraduates about the joys of economic theory, it's nice to have a mostly full room to talk to for a change. So I'm going to talk to you about my Coalesce project that's coming towards the end, about a month left to go. It was mostly funded by Coalesce, but I also want to note that it was supported by the Ukrainian Researchers Scheme, which is a wonderful initiative that everybody involved should be proud of. And if I had one ask for our friends in Research Ireland, it would be to continue and extend that scheme, because it really has helped our Ukrainian friends a great deal. Thanks are due to Research Ireland, but also to Irish Aid as they fund this. And I'm just going to talk to you about what we did with the money that you gave us. COGS, as we call it, Corruption, Gender and Sustainable Development, had 4 objectives, 4 pillars. The overall idea was to look at ways in which corruption, previously understudied ways in which corruption is bad for economic and social outcomes. The first one, which is the one I'm going to focus on, was about how sexual corruption, which is criminally understudied, this is where corruption takes the form not of bribes but of sex or sexual favours, is a deterrent to female entrepreneurship. We also looked at kind of a bag of studies using some qualitative, quantitative and experimental data on how biases and stereotypes get in the way of outcomes. We did a good chunk of work on corruption and access to public services, and then also a broader project was to look at corruption as a barrier to sustainable development in general, and I'll talk to you about that as well a little bit. This is the core team. A good-looking bunch of people with one exception. The thing I want to note here is the thing I'm most proud of about this project is that our 3 postdocs, Doris, Idrissa and Alessia, have all gone on to better things, which I think is a real testament to their talent, but also to the transformative power of funding like this. So Doris is now an assistant professor over in UCD. Idrissa's got a job as an assistant professor in Burkina Faso, and Alessia has some good news recently come through. That's embargoed, so I can't tell you more about it, but they've all gone on to greater success. What did we do? We did a lot. As I said, the thing I'm most proud of is that they've gone on to establish themselves as independent researchers. We have a rake of papers. We have the edited volume I'll talk a little bit about later, which is Corruption, Gender and Sustainable Development, which is 17 chapters, one each for each goal, how corruption is bad for that goal. We've lots of conference presentations, and we've also brought in, on the back of the research that we've done, more funding than we were given to begin with. So we've gone on to do more things, not from Research Ireland, from the Commission, from some American outfits and so on. So we've gone through that. We've had a bunch of meetings with stakeholders. We put on some entrepreneurship training for nascent female entrepreneurs in Burkina Faso, and so on. So what did we find, right? And I'm not going to go into the methodology in any great detail. We had both qualitative and quantitative approaches to try and understand the lived reality of sexual corruption around the world. First thing we found was that if you try and understand what drives the incidence of sexual corruption, none of the standard things that seem to drive corruption drive sexual corruption. Press freedom, democracy. We couldn't find any evidence that these things are predictors of the rate of sexual corruption. What really matters is the rate of standard corruption, which we took to interpret to mean that kind of impunity, old boys networks, corrupt networks facilitate sexual corruption, which really is, I mean, it's a truly miserable thing that I can't really get into all the awful effects of it. But one effect that we did find was that sexual corruption rates are a deterrent to entrepreneurship, but only for female entrepreneurship and only for women who are starting a business because they see an opportunity. Entrepreneurs of necessity are the ones who are probably most unable to escape sexual predators, public officials. What else have we found? Well, we found quite a lot. We found papers about corruption in the policing sector, giving rise to increased risks of crime, restricting access to healthcare and education. No evidence of gender differences, but that's a limitation to data, I think, rather than evidence that there's no gender differences here. We looked at corruption and health inequality. We did quite a lot of work on Ukraine. And really a big takeaway from this is we cannot hope to achieve any of the SDGs. No matter what fantastic widgets and doodads my friends in the natural sciences come up with, we won't be achieving any SDG if we don't get a handle on corruption. There is more to do. From the foreword to our book, which I'm very happy and honoured that Mary Robinson wrote the foreword to. Mary Robinson quite clearly lays out that if we're going to solve any of the challenges to the world's problems, we have to take corruption seriously. And that book should be out by the end of the year. Some of the chapters are already as preprints online. What next? Well, there's more to do. We need to know more about fighting sexual corruption. That's what I'm just going to go over time slightly. That's what some of our subsequent funding has given rise to. And there's a bunch of other things that come out of it. But I suppose what really comes next is I would like some more money, please, if you don't mind. So thanks very much for your attention. Thanks to Research Ireland and Irish Aid.
Hi, I'm Caitriona Jackman from the Dias Planetary Group, and this is the solar system. Earth, you can see, is where you are right now, the perfect place for life to thrive. It's not too hot, like Mercury and Venus, and it's not too cold, like Mars. But have you ever wondered if there's anywhere else in the solar system where life might be able to exist? Well, first, let's think about what we need for life to thrive. So this diagram on the left shows the 3 key ingredients. The first is liquid water. The second is a source of energy. And then the third is a chemical soup, which allows for the building blocks for microbial life and more complex organisms like ourselves. So Earth has all of those things in abundance. We live in this so-called Goldilocks zone where everything is just right. But spoiler alert, we may not be the only place where conditions are just right. And ESA, the European Space Agency, and NASA have identified the moons of the outer solar system as the most likely place beyond the Earth for conditions for habitability to be met. So let's have a little look at some of those moons. This is a moon of Saturn called Enceladus. It's an icy moon, and frankly, Enceladus is a bit of an oddball. So the top part looks like a moon. It's covered in craters. We come to expect that from moons. But the bottom part is totally different. So the southern pole is covered in these deep cracks, and around the cracks, it's very smooth, and we have clean, fresh ice. So something is active at Enceladus to be replenishing that southern polar region. And about 20 years ago, this year, I was working on the Cassini mission at Saturn, and we found that Enceladus is actually producing geysers or jets of material from these cracks in the South Pole. And we were able to fly the spacecraft directly through those geysers or those plumes and sniff the chemical composition of them. And what do you think we found? Well, we found water vapor, among other things. So Enceladus is a top candidate for being able to support habitability. But Jupiter also has a couple of so-called ocean worlds. So Ganymede on the left and Europa on the right. Both artists' impressions, in case that's not obvious. So when I say an ocean world, the picture usually is that we have an icy crust, because it's pretty cold out at Jupiter. Underneath the crust, we have an ocean of some thickness and of some level of salinity or saltiness. So that's what we think we have at Ganymede. Europa on the right is just an incredibly cool place. So we think that Europa has a very damaged and a very sort of dirty looking icy surface, then about 10 kilometers thick of ice, then a salty ocean that's in contact with a rocky interior. Now, I don't know if there's any Earth oceanographers here or anyone who just watches like National Geographic regularly, but the picture that we're looking at here might be familiar to many of you, because what we're thinking about is hydrothermal vents that could exist at the bottom of that ocean. And when we're talking about habitability, we're talking about really simple organisms that could thrive near those hydrothermal vents. Because if you think back to that triangle of what we need for life, liquid water, tick. Source of energy, tick. So what's missing is the chemistry. And the way that we study the chemistry, ideally, is if we can fly through these plumes, because then we can sniff them and we can work out what they're made of. So that's what we're going to do in my group. So I lead the planetary group at DIAS, and we're working on a mission called JUICE. Horrible acronym, I didn't pick it. It's the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer. JUICE launched in 2023, and it will get to the Jupiter system in 2031 with the express aim of studying the conditions which may support habitability. But before we make big claims about habitability, we have to have the highest possible fidelity measurements of the charged particle environment. So the work that we do really is a mix of plasma physics and material science and high-performance computing and machine learning. And we're exploring how the spacecraft becomes electrically charged in space and how this impacts the trajectories of charged particles in the environment. So I'll end with this, which is an artist's impression of an ocean cryobot in the ocean of Europa. Now, it would not be smart of me to overpromise and underdeliver, especially given that everybody who funds my lifestyle is in this room. But I will say that I think we will find that conditions for habitability are met in the outer solar system. I'm quite sure that we will discover that when JUICE gets there in 2031. So the next stage, if we find that the conditions are met, is to go and search for that life. And I'm really excited to be working at the cutting edge of that potentially huge breakthrough. So watch this space. Thank you.
Folks, little change in tack now from the last speaker as we move into the area of sexual consent, sexual violence and harassment. So maybe just a quick segue to ease us into that. Just on the slide there, you can see our leadership team on the Active Consent Programme based at the University of Galway. So I'm come from a psychology background, Gemma from psychotherapy, Clarissa from social work, Siobhan O'Higgins, another one of our founders who recently retired from the program, but I just can't stop putting her on our slides, comes from a health promotion background. And then Charlotte, who comes from a theatre and drama background. Okay, so sexual violence is an epidemic in our society. And in Ireland, 52% of adult women, 28% of men have experienced it in their lifetime, according to the 2023 CSO National Survey. Based at the University of Galway, our Active Consent Programme addresses this crisis in a particular way by promoting everybody's right to consent, the right to say yes or no to sexual intimacy. The impact of the programme is demonstrated by our role in a significant change in Ireland over the past decade, from silence, largely, on sexual violence to its standing now, really as a national priority. And the first significant funding that we received was in 2015, Research for Policy and Society programme awarded by the then Irish Research Council and HSE Sexual Health programme. So drawing on health promotion and psychology, we had designed a method to create and evaluate workshops with young people, combining story-based explorations of consent with activities created from our research, stats, and survey findings. In turn, that workshop had stemmed from our first consent conversations with college students in a study funded by Rape Crisis Network Ireland. 10 years later, so massive kind of gap in this is the funder report, 10 years on. So I'm delighted to have the chance just to report back on the progress since that first investment in our research and settings-based approach to this issue. Okay, so from the slide, you can see the approach that we're taking. We want color, we want vibrancy, we want engagement, and also people. So in all those little pictures, we have many different people, and that's crucial. It's about relationships, trust, and working across many different settings and designing engaging outreach activities. And there's three parts really to the method that we use to achieve this. The first was research-based educational resources for young people, like the workshops that I mentioned, and we've gone on to develop many variations on that. And we record the learning of students each year, document its impact, and build that into a cycle of continuous change. We had our first model of doing this in universities, and then went on to create similar resources for post-primary schools, and also the further education and training sector. What are you going to do after that? Sustainability, and key to sustainability is training for all of those teachers, university staff, student leaders. And so across the country now, educational professionals and student leaders can run our workshops independently and support their students throughout the year. The final step was to reach out to policymakers in government departments, and some of our reports there that we've listed are one of the most successful mechanisms to do that, because that is where long-term change is achieved. So we're now named in, for example, the Programme for Government, the University Framework for Ending Sexual Violence, the National Strategy for Ending Gender-Based Violence. There's many impact stories to draw on from all of that work over the past decade. So an average of 20,000 first-year university students annually have engaged in our orientation resource. We created the first national university campus survey, which led indirectly to a really fundamental change, the appointment of sexual violence prevention and response managers in each university for the very first time. So our stakeholders tell us that active consent is more than a program, it's an ideology. It's designed to protect us through a culture of empowerment and respect. However, it still comes down to consent being understood and applied as ongoing, mutual, and freely given. The OMFG acronym, designed by our drama students a number of years ago. And that's underpinned by critical thinking, the confidence to communicate, and conversations on consent. So I hope that you will visit Consent Hub. There's a tiny little QR code for Consent Hub. And I remind you that our microcreds level 9 module is open and recruiting for autumn of this year. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Pádraig, Caitriona, Robert and Nina. It's really great to hear about research today because that's really what this is all about. I'm Ruth Freeman. I'm the Director of Research for Society at Research Ireland, and I'm really delighted to chair our final panel discussion for today. It's a very important discussion on engaging through co-creation, building shared solutions for change. And exactly like our previous panels, the conversation that we're going to have will build on some of the national stakeholder workshops that have already happened around the country, but they will also continue to feed in to the dialogues that are going to help us shape our strategic direction in Research Ireland. The very eminent panel that we have today, I suppose, are thought leaders in this space. They are people who exemplify co-creation in their work. They're people who are constantly thinking about how research can have that positive impact. And they're going to share with you lots of examples of collaborating not only across disciplines, but also with citizens, communities and policymakers to help shape research. Think, as we kick off this conversation about engaged research, think about patient and public involvement, think about citizen science and mission-led research. These are the kind of topics we're going to be discussing. And I think in doing that, we'll be exploring how research can more effectively respond to societal needs. And I think in the broadest sense, as that conversation has happened during the morning, but also how we can bridge the gap between evidence and policy. And I think importantly, coming back to a word that was used a lot this morning, how can we build trust and make sure that we have an inclusive research system and I suppose an inclusive way in which we think about knowledge in our society, who owns it and how it's used. So with that, let me introduce our panel. I'll ask them all to come up here and join me on the stage. We have William Bosang, who's the Assistant Secretary at the Department for Further and Higher Education, Research and Innovation and Science. We have Professor Linda Hogan, who's the Professor of Ecumenics at Trinity College in Dublin. And Linda was the Chair of the Expert Committee of the Creating Our Future campaign, which was run by government a number of years ago to engage citizens in research ideas. We have Dr. Evie Nihulavon from the School of Associate Professor in the School of STEM Education at Dublin City University. And Eoin is also the chair of the Independent Advisory Group on Nature Restoration and was previously the chair of Ireland's Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And then last but not least, we have Professor Kevin O'Connor, who's Professor of Applied Microbiology and Biotechnology at University College Dublin and is also the Director of the BioOrbic Research Ireland Bioeconomy Research Centre. So thank you so much to the panel for joining us here today. So I suppose let's get straight into the heart of the discussion. We're hearing more and more about co-creation as a term, But I suppose, what does it mean in practice, and why do we even think about it? What are the benefits? So probably the best way to start is maybe to give a bit of background on your experiences in working with co-creation, and then maybe talking about some of those benefits. So Eoin, can I come to you first? Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your experience in reaching out in that sort of co-creation methodology, and what you've done, and kind of what's worked?
Thanks, Ruth. I might just spend 1 second saying where I've come from on this, because I used to be a secondary school teacher, and my research looks at mathematics education and how we can bring that as a positive experience to more young people. And actually, to be okay with failing means bringing those, entrepreneurial skills that we talked about at the very morning. I think we start teaching that across all subjects at primary level, and it will come through. But with a different hat now on, I'm working now in a space that's unfamiliar to me in the research context, but actually what I've done so far in my research, I feel has really helped me if I'm thinking about curriculum reform and how we can support teachers to support students. That doesn't work if it's just from the bottom up. It has to be top down as well with resources. And it's exactly the same I see now in something like if you're doing the Citizens' Assembly and now the Nature Restoration Law, where every single country in the EU has to put together a nature restoration plan to submit that by September 2026 out to 2050. Now that's something that's enormous, and we are required by law to do stakeholder engagement with it. And there's so much work happening on the ground, but now the question is, well, how do we support that through policy? And so co-creation comes into it in a lot of ways, because as scientists or as researchers, sometimes we think we have the answer. And then, as a lot of people have already said on the panels here today, then you go out and you go, oh, actually, that's not going to work at all. Or I've been using the wrong language, or I haven't been thinking about this in the context and where it is. And so what I've learned is that if you're to engage with others that are not researchers, it has to be part of your design, and that we have to really think about stakeholder engagement as much about how we do it as much as it is about the end product for maybe us. And that's the space that I'm in now. I feel like I'm in a very privileged position in that I cross that barrier to policy, and that I'm trying to get from the ground now stakeholder engagement from farmer associations, with scientists, with the environmental NGOs, and that's a very interesting room to be in. And if I could just give one colourful example from it, we held a stakeholder engagement meeting with about 80 people, 60 different organisations the end of March. And at the end of the day, I got a text from a farmer to say it was such a pleasure to sit at a table with people who cared as much about nature as me. And they're not the stories that we hear. No. And so stakeholder engagement, I feel part of it is the story that we share with people to try and explain what we would like to do, but it's also to collect those stories, because we can't do good research if we're not going to tell the story well. And we're all doing research for the benefit of humanity, and with that we have to really try and work with it. What can we create that's going to be useful to them, but also that we feel will get that vision as well. So I feel now, as I'm 10 years down the line in my career as a researcher, stakeholder engagement is actually core from the design outwards. From that, that's my perspective on it now.
Thank you. And maybe Kevin, if I can come to you, and again, if you don't mind, just maybe giving us a little bit of background of kind of your experience of engaging more kind of outside of maybe your direct research counterparts for research. And then, I suppose, touching on, what are maybe some of the pitfalls, but also the benefits?
Sure, yeah. And so I'm a microbiologist, and the example I'm going to give you is about farming and agriculture. So you'll wonder, why is a microbiologist interacting with farmers? But as director of BioOrbic, as a bioeconomy research centre, we work right across the spectrum with a number of stakeholders inside in the bioeconomy. And I think the design of the bioeconomy for almost a decade or over a decade hasn't actually put agriculture farmers or biomass producers at the centre of the solution. So we had been talking to various agricultural organisations, and they felt that, as you have said, the narrative was negative about agriculture. The narrative was, you're the problem, not the solution. But if you talk to farmers and they say, I care about nature, I care about the land that I manage, and I want to pass it on to my kids, but is there a future in agriculture? Is agriculture dead? So from talking then to various processors as well, they were saying, you know, some of them were quite bullish about the fact that I think we can be climate neutral, I think we can be nature positive. But then, and there was an opportunity to challenge-based funding that came out from Research Ireland, and we saw this as an opportunity, and we said, okay, how do we actually do research that is going to start to change the narrative? And I don't mean change the narrative as in, let's just make a story. Yeah, change a narrative in that put the farmer at the centre of the solution, because right now the farmer is the centre of the problem, or that's how it's perceived. So I think one of the things really was a theory of change exercise that we went through with Research Ireland. That really, because we brought in the processors, we had researchers, etc., as part of the team. And the advantage, I suppose, of being part of BioRbic is that you can actually pull on a number of resources very quickly. A lot of people you collaborate already, bring them in. And I think our vision as scientists initially was very different to the vision we painted after we did the theory of change. I think that's really important. And you know, you mentioned the place, who you're interacting with, how you interact with, the language that you use. All of these things are really, really important. So if you speak a too technical language, then you sound a bit preachy, or you sound a bit like, well, you know all the solutions. And I'm always saying science actually has none of the solutions. Science has all of the questions. That's why we're scientists. We're asking questions. And usually we get an answer that raises 10 more questions. Yeah. So, but when you're dealing with farmers, what we found was that they don't tolerate nonsense. They're very much about, well, I can smell it from a mile off. If this smells like what I think you're saying, I can smell it. So, but we also you need to understand that in order to engage with a farmer, it's not you as a scientist with a white coat saying, okay, I'm going to engage. Peer-to-peer learning is really important. So we're really lucky in that we had Carberry as our cheerleader. I'm trying to think of the word that we use in the
Society
champions. Thanks very much. But it's really important as well to be working with people who have a vision that says, yes, we can make the change. And when you have somebody like that, farmers will listen to another farmer. And the person we were actually engaging with was Enda Buckley, and his father is a farmer, his brother's a farmer. He works in Carberry as a processor. He's heading up their sustainability, he's director of sustainability. But he was able to talk the language of farmers. It wasn't until he had talked to them and built up that relationship that then we came in. So I think it's very important that you build the right relationships, know the language that you have to speak, but also be very prepared to understand that this is as much a learning journey for you as it is for them. I think that's really important. Yeah. Come with questions and find the solutions.
Yeah. Thank you. And maybe moving to another place that doesn't tolerate nonsense, William. You know, how important is this kind of work when you're coming from your position, where you're working in government, where you're trying to make the case for research funding? Yeah. You know, how important is it that researchers are doing this kind of broader engagement with the work?
Well, I think in terms of a spectrum, you know, when you think about this issue, there's the wisdom of crowds and the madness of crowds, and it's the role that research can play as trusted third parties, because research science is trusted generally by the population. And it's a huge opportunity, I think, to sort of bring people into an understanding of what issues are by engaging with them. I've a long experience in the civil service, and I'm out of the research system, so it's a kind of a public service experience I'm talking about. You have many different types of consultation and engagement, and rarely enough co-design. But when co-design works, it really makes a difference. I'm really struck by what was said earlier about you're going out with what you think is the question. Indeed, as a civil servant, you're often going out with what you think is the answer. But it's the experience of engaging with people that can really change your mindset. I was very lucky at a stage in my career. I had the open government unit in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and the Minister at the time, Mr. Howland, wanted legislation done on whistleblowing, on lobbying. And I had a really good engagement. It just was fortuitous that Gary Murphy, Raj from DCU, Raj Chari from Trinity, and John Hogan from TUD, as it is now, had done, I think it's called a monologue, but I call it a book, where they had benchmarked international lobbying systems internationally. And they were able to be really influential in guiding us to what was a good outcome in terms of the design of our own lobbying legislation. So that really rooted my understanding of how research can really deliver a public good. More recently, another experience I had was around the OECD review of our national skills strategy. And when you bring the OECD in, you have a kind of a perspective that they're going to sit in Paris, zoom in for a few calls and tell you what the international experience is. But it was really, heartening to see the extent that they were willing to reach out to a very broad community when you're talking about skills and skills policy in Ireland and all the different dimensions to it. And the extent to which they kind of, by engaging with that community, they gathered that collective intelligence, the wisdom of the crowd, if you like, that can really help shape a report that, really gives us a trajectory and a way forward around skills policy that we hadn't had previously. But more than that, everybody who looks at that report with an interest will see themselves in the contents, the analysis, and the recommendations. So it's really the core piece for me is the research community understanding, and taking the question that was asked earlier about the time and the resource constraints from working this way. But a broad engagement really yields very substantial and significant benefits in terms of bringing research out there. And I mean, I'll finish on this, when I started in the Department of Education, I remember a colleague who had worked there said, what you need to know is education is its own solar system. Well, we had the presentation from Dias. So research is a kind of one of the right term, but it's understanding that what your collective understanding, your collective intelligence, isn't something that's kind of generally permeating what is happening in our society and even among policymakers. And it's really sort of mobilizing and understanding the benefit. And we've already heard a great example at this panel of reaching out and how that can be influential in finding solutions to what we like to call the wicked problems that are there for us.
And I mean, coming to you, Linda, maybe, because with creating our future, I mean, the idea there was somewhat radical, because it wasn't about sort of a particular research project that we were going to go out and engage with. It was actually going right back to the very beginning, maybe, of the concept of an idea about research and going to talk to the public about that. And I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about, what happened with that? You chaired the expert group that looked at all of those ideas. And I suppose, what did it tell you, or what did the public tell you in all of their ideas when they came back to you?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. It was a very exciting project. And I think, as people may know, there were 18,000 submissions, over 1,500 events, ambassadors speaking to the public, engaging with the public, asking them, what's your understanding of research and what it can do for your future? And there was an extensive process of consultation and many ideas, and the expert group had to try and make sense of all these very disparate ideas, and we did so. We looked at it through various different lenses, the classic STEM, arts, humanities sort of lenses, but then also the design thinking lens to try and see what's beneath all of these ideas. And I think quite apart from all of the discrete areas that the public saw real significance in research, namely, housing policy, climate change, building sustainable communities, etc. Underneath that, I think that the main things that struck the committee was, first of all, that, and William has already alluded to this, the public has a very strong sense of the potential and promise of research. That there is a sense that research is expert and it's performed with integrity, and that's important. They also saw the real value of a research policy interface, But I think a lot of people in those submissions signal that that's not quite right yet in terms of the Irish system. And I think the other thing that really emerged from it is the way in which, while the public has a very good grasp of how particular research can address specific issues, there's really, I think, a lack of understanding of the nature of research. What is fundamental research? What is the research process? What do timeframes mean? And so I think we do need to do some work in explaining that, communicating that, probably through research projects, but not just talking about the content of the research, but also what it takes to do this, what kind of collaborations are needed, what does it mean to be curiosity-based, what does that mean for the public. So I think communicating those ideas as well as the content and the outcomes of research is very important.
I mean, I suppose coming to those kind of maybe broader benefits of engagement, and I think I picked up, Eoin and Kevin, from both of you, again, it's that word kind of building relationships, taking time, building trust. I mean, it feels like that brings other benefits apart from the benefits for the immediate project, but it also feels like it takes time and resources. So can you speak to that, Eoin?
Yeah, well, I think in one way to start, without panicking anybody, that, as researchers, we really have to think about, well, what is the purpose that I'm going out to engage with people for? Is it actually co-creation? Do I really want their ideas about how and what I'm going to be looking at? Or do I want structured feedback from actually the people who are already practicing and experts in their own fields on this? So I think there are layers to this in the co-creation aspect. I think to pick up on Linda's point, it's so key that people understand what the research process is. I think citizen science projects, and we heard so much about those in the Citizens' Assembly, they have a huge role to play because across Ireland, all of our state agencies like the National Biodiversity Data Centre, National Parks and Wildlife do some, and Birdwatch Ireland, all their NGOs, there's huge citizen science projects. And if you meet people who engage them, they're so proud that they are participating in research and that they're going out to do it. You can get children to do it. So I think that's definitely one aspect that we can really focus on in terms of building that co-creation of research, and so that it expands what research is, that understanding. But to kind of follow up on what William was saying, I actually think we need more researchers within the civil service, and that we've talked about pipelines for our graduates and our postgraduates today, and absolutely we need to be expanding our innovation and our research and academia in general. But I would love to see more people going into the civil service who really understand what research is, what is a research process. And I think when we have that, we will get more evidence-based research, because it's the policymakers that we are constantly trying to engage with on this. And if our researchers become our policymakers, I feel that that would be one way to tackle that.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, do you want to talk about the kind of resources, the trust issue, and maybe any kind of those ethical dimensions about going in to work with people?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So just maybe to touch on the broader benefits of engagement as well. Obviously farmers were our core people that we want to engage with, but what we found was that once the project was up and running and that people started to know about it, you became a magnet for other stakeholders to get involved. That's SMEs, entrepreneurs, internationally people starting to say, what are you doing, how are you doing it? We have the same challenges. Like, for example, in Scotland, we had parties coming over saying, okay, we would like to learn from you on how you do this. Policymakers, school kids, it kind of almost became too big, and you're like, how do we manage this? Where the farm, actually, we were using a commercial farm, because that's the other thing. We wanted to use a commercial farm to convince farmers that this isn't a plaything. This is a real farm that needs to make a profit. And so the things we're doing are not the Mercedes-Benz solutions. They're actually the Lada solutions, or the Skoda solutions. Sorry if anybody drives a Skoda. But we wanted to have those kind of solutions. So we think the benefits there are that it actually engages more people than you anticipate. So if you never go out, you think, okay, this is my solution and this is what I'm going to bring. But if you go out first, you realize that you actually attract a huge number of voices and different voices. So that's the first thing. In terms of resources, so it is actually very expensive to do these projects actually, yeah? So this is one of the things, there's a lot of money needed to actually engage properly. So are you engaging just to say, well, I ticked a box, I was out there, I saw them, you know, that's great. Are you really doing quality engagement? So are you assessing the engagement? You know, so that's part of what we do as well as part of the Farm Zero C project, is to actually understand, well, what kind of feedback are we getting? What kind of questions are we asking? Do we need to go back out and ask different questions? Yeah. So there's a huge resource intensity to that. On the ethical issues, yes, you are dealing with people's lives. You are asking them questions. You have to anonymize things as well. You have to make sure that people can speak openly and freely, and that they don't feel like, well, if I write something down here, is this going to come back to me? So you have to be very, you have to play by the book. You have to be very careful on how you do things. But also, I think some people will say, well, how can you change the sector if you're collaborating with them, and aren't they the problem? So you also have to address that, and you have to be very open about that. Yeah. So, and one of the things is you could say, well, is this greenwashing? Yeah. Are the industry just trying to get you? You are a recognized scientist. You're pulling in a bunch of other recognized scientists, and basically, they will convince you to say the right thing. Yeah. But you have to then just say, well, I'm a researcher. I'm trusted. I have my reputation. If I do this, is this going to come back to bite me? And absolutely, if you don't say this is the data, this is the science. And again, very luckily with Carberry and with the farmers, they are open to the fact that they're saying, guys, you have a problem here. This is your big elephant in the room. We need to address this. Yeah. So there are difficult conversations, definitely very difficult conversations. And you will, again, have a certain percentage of farmers who will say, no, that you're just another bunch of academics trying to tell us what we're trying to do. Others will say this will never work. I mean, a lot of farmers are saying, forget about it, this is doomed, you're never just going to find a solution. So there are multiple ways in which you have to engage. There are obviously ethical issues in how you approach it, but you have to stand by your morals, by your standards.
Yeah.
Not everybody will believe you on that, yeah?
Yeah. But I know, Linda, you've given this some thought, as well as kind of the transparency with which you engage with people, but also kind of the not just turning up once, you know, that if you're actually building a real relationship, that requires time, commitment, investment.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I think also as part of thinking about co-creation, and I do quite a bit of work with a lot of companies and organizations from the ethics perspective, thinking about, well, often they call you in and say, you know, we have this problem, this systemic problem in our ethics or our culture, how do we address this? And very often, I think what you have to do, first of all, is to really be clear that you're not just dealing with a symptom and you're actually really dealing with the core issue. And that is about building trust. It's about getting to know the kind of informal culture as well as the formal cultures in the various places where you're involved with stakeholders. It means thinking about their systems, their conflicts of interest, and helping them also think about those issues for themselves. So I think the researcher has to be reflective, thinking about their own standpoint, and also be able to enable the community with which one's engaging to do the same from their perspective. And very often you find that what you began by being asked to address, the problem, is not the problem at all. And that, you know, because as we know, organizations and cultures have many different ways of masking or what's happening, or have blind spots, or, you know, inherited and systemic absences that are never addressed. So I think that's part of the ethical issues those are part of, among the ethical issues you have to deal with when you're thinking about co-creation and stakeholder engagement as well.
And again, William, you touched on kind of working with the OECD and how broad consultation probably makes for better policy. But when it comes to that particular relationship between academic research and government, and Eoin has sort of made the plea, well, could we have more overlap in those spaces as well? I mean, we have the Public Service Fellowship where researchers are placed in government departments, but could and should we be doing more in that area? Are there structures that we should be thinking about to keep those kind of channels of communication open all the time, as opposed to just on a sort of project by project
we definitely
basis?
should, and there's a lot of work been done. But I do want to come back on a few things. I was struck, first of all, by the point that Linda made around, lack of understanding of the scientific method. And one thing that struck me, and from the shorts, the research presentations, people are asking questions. Researchers are asking questions. I don't know in the general public whether people would that would be their knee-jerk understanding would be researchers ask questions. No, it would be people tell us, as Kevin was saying, people tell us how things are. The other thing, so it's sort of, I think it's very important to show, or to continue to show form in engaging with this issue. And I mean, there's no sense other than a kind of humility about the scientific process, the research process, from all the discussion today. But is it communicated more broadly? And of course, public debate doesn't encourage nuance. The other thing I'd want to say, I mean, when you see figures for adult skills here in Ireland and the level of basic literacy and numeracy difficulties, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of the population, where is scientific literacy? And I'm sure lots of people in the room know a lot about that and have ideas about it. But I mean, I really think it's important that it's something that we focus on, because you see, using the phrase, like, is there an alternative to trying to do more and more of this? Because my knowledge of science is restricted to nature abhors a vacuum. So we know what has happened in a situation where sort of disconnection and a kind of a gulf between the research community and other institutions and the broader population just creates a scenario where misinformation and disinformation thrives. So there's a big picture issue for us, and it holds for the research community, it holds into public policy. Going back to Eoin's question, I think it's also very interesting, and again in the sense of sort of breaking down silos. So there's a professional researcher and there's professional research, but when you think about the skills required to be successful in the 21st century in the world of work, curiosity, focus on discovery, critical thinking, technical proficiency, all the kind of capabilities that a professional researcher needs to have. And I think it's important, like, you have to be clear about somebody's qualifications and their capability to do research and and so on. But we should be probably more open, and going back to the question that Eoin was asking, that those kind of skills, that's the kind of skills you want everybody to have, because those are the skills that will ensure that people are successful in their chosen work and in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we used to talk about the term science capital. I mean, how comfortable is someone generally with the concept of science? But I think we could talk about research capital just as easily. And so many of the issues that society is facing has a dimension that a comfort with some of these topics lets people into the conversation, and a lack of comfort kind of keeps them out. So it's absolutely critical. Eoin, I know you're trying to get in there.
Well, I just wanted to respond to William's point, because I think that phrase about scientific literacy, I think we focused on it a lot about a decade ago, and then it kind of fell by the wayside, or maybe we didn't feel like we needed to focus on it as much. And we've seen recently have one of the most educated populations. I think Mark Little mentioned it as well. So that scientific literacy is there, but perhaps we're not tapping into it as much as we could be. And I think maybe us cultivating that sense of curiosity, but also that sense of skepticism. We're quite good at that in Ireland. And I was just writing recently about mathematicians are skeptical of you know, a mathematical sentence until they can see it proven from foundations. And I think those skills that we just maybe need to focus on them a little bit more. That mathematical literacy feeds into that scientific literacy. And if you don't mind me hijacking this idea for a moment, I think now we need to build up our ecological literacy, because throughout today, I don't think we focused enough on nature. And if we don't have nature, there is no point in us focusing on innovation and the economy and society, because it doesn't exist without nature being there. And if nature continues to decline at the rate that it is, it's going to fall off a precipice. And the reason that so many businesses focused on the nature restoration regulation, which came in the EU the summer before last, is that they said you cannot run a thriving business in a dying biosphere. And we need to really refocus ourselves on that, on making sure we're looking after the environment. And so I think, as well as that scientific literacy, that co-creation, that focus on research, absolutely. But let's also try and bring in a little bit more of the ecological literacy, because that is required for a foundation for all of the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Linda?
Yeah, just to add to that a little, I think it's also important to broaden the conversation to talk about the role that the arts and humanities play in this domain. And in particular, I think you know, the public may be put off by the language of science, or feel it's unfamiliar, but the language of arts and humanities is actually the language of politics, of society, of culture. And I think, you know, the role that the arts and humanities can play in building the kind of foundations for a humane and inclusive society on which the economy and a flourishing economy depends, I think that's really important. So although, you know, it's about cultivating how the arts and humanities can cultivate reflective individuals, people who are thinking about the nature of their society. What does it mean to live in a pluralist society? What does it mean to live in a society where our biosphere is dying? All of these things, I think those are really crucial questions as well. And I think the language of arts, humanities, and engagement through arts, humanities, culture, creative arts practice, all of that, I think, can be other ways, more familiar ways of the public engaging with these big questions that we have today.
Could I just quickly sort of support that point, just from a personal experience I had recently, by virtue of being invited out to UCD to hear about some work they're doing on reviewing the folklore collection there. And thinking about that 90 years ago, reflecting work done by what we call an NGO, the Folklore Commission was established and launched a huge project of citizen engagement, school children engagement, where they collected an enormous amount of material from school children on the folklore in their areas, and that resource been available on Ducas, and just giving such a strong sense. And obviously, you come into the research area and National Research Strategy and its impact and its innovation and its economic value added. But just seeing the benefit and the kind of, you know, kind of characterizing as a huge cultural asset that kind of goes to our identity and is absolutely open and, you know, to being updated if there was a will to do that. Because, I mean, I think I picked up the term vernacular culture, that's happening day by day and is available to us if we want to decide to collect it and help us then define who we are now as opposed to who we were 90 years ago.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go to Peter and questions just in a minute, but maybe just very quickly, Linda, because we had talked about this beforehand. For researchers that are really working in the very fundamental spaces, whether they, you know, no matter what discipline they're in, you know, what about engagement for them? What does engagement mean, do you think, for someone who really feels they're working very much in the fundamentals?
Well, I think people can work in the fundamentals of research but they're working in an ecosystem that is for the public good. And so I think, obviously people's motivations are different, but I think the broader context in which research is done, especially publicly funded research, it's in and for the public good, and for the development of knowledge and for the betterment of society. So I don't necessarily think that individuals, many of my colleagues, wouldn't want to have to map what they do to a specific end point. But I think if you look historically and then you look downstream, like the folklore collection is an excellent example. If you look 20 years' time, 50 years' time, then you can sometimes see the real benefit of curiosity-driven or fundamental research. So I think sometimes we have these false binaries. You're either doing fundamental research where you can't articulate the impact, or you're doing engaged research. I don't think that's the way research is for most researchers. They're doing both often a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that whole piece around even just the communication is so important, because it's breaking down the barriers and it's building up trust as well. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I mean, I could have spent the whole day speaking to the four of you, so thank you so much for those really insightful and interesting contributions. So can I ask you all to please thank our panel, Kevin, Eoin, Linda and William. Thank you so much. Now going to hand over to the Interim CEO of Research Ireland, Celine Fitzgerald, who's going to close our event today. Thanks so much, Celine.
So you can all relax, because I'm going to be really brief. I think we had a masterclass in the power of brevity from our presenters today, because the amount they communicated in the 5 minutes was really, really impressive. So, I mean, I think we all learned a lot from that, quite apart from the content of those presentations. So thank you to all of those wonderful presenters today. Just to remind ourselves, I suppose, that the purpose of today was to bring stakeholders together to share perspectives on the future direction of Research Ireland, to allow a contribution to the development of our long-term strategy, and also to explore new ways to collaborate in strengthening our ecosystem, and also to understand and hear from each other different perspectives from across the entire ecosystem. And I think we can, just to pick up on the theme from the very last question there, can we assess the effectiveness of that? I think certainly from some of the feedback that I've been getting already today, I think there's been a lot of learning in the room by listening to each other. I think there was a clear focus for us in organising today was to consider the environment in which we operate in light of the evolving geopolitical landscape, and I suppose this age of chaos that Mark referred to this morning. How can we collaborate better with each other, with government agencies across the HEIs, and with co-funders, industry and other organisations? So just very briefly, I mean, I think we had, some incredible insights today, right from the start this morning, which seems like a very long time ago now. But I think Mark Little set the challenge for us to focus on the problem before jumping to solutions, and somebody else referenced the quote from him about falling in love with the problem, and I think that's really resonated. We heard then about the need to move away from siloed thinking, and how, in this environment of chaos, there are still opportunities. We heard about the benefits of our highly educated population, and that very thought-provoking phrase about, are we educating job takers as opposed to job makers? We debated IP and open source models, There was an excellent discussion, I think, on the purpose of Research Ireland, and we'll take a lot of that back, and that will continue to feed into the development of our strategy. So all of that. The other one that really resonated, I think, was the suggestion by Aoife around the introduction of a lottery as part of the selection process for funding. That was very interesting indeed. Also, the huge focus on talent and the role that the Research Ireland and all of us can play in understanding how better to manage that. You know, they need to focus on sustainability of careers, both for researchers and research professionals. Again, the emphasis on multidisciplinary research and the idea that we need really strong disciplines before we can have really strong interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research. And I know that those definitions are very important to get right, and we won't get into it now. We talked about EDI, and then finally we had an excellent debate there at the end around co-creation. So I think, you know, overall, as you go to bed tonight and as you sleep or as you travel home, lots of the thoughts that came up today, no doubt, will float to the top of your mind and hopefully will inspire you in some way in the coming days and weeks. I particularly want now to thank a number of people. I want to thank all our speakers and panellists, the Minister for coming here and sharing his insights. I think Cambridge might lose Eoin from academia to entertainment. He's definitely could give Wogan or one of those a run for their money. I want to thank all the staff from Research Ireland and all my colleagues who participated in the events. So finally, thanks to everybody here who has stayed with us to the death. I'm very appreciative. I thought I would be speaking to an empty room at this stage. So thanks to all of you, and also to our friends and colleagues online. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you. Thanks very much.